So you hadn't had contact with the president for 2 years. You had no notice in advance of the commutation.
Except for, I should say, I had faith that it would.
Yes, yeah, I heard you on that point. I'm curious, do you recall where you were when you first heard the news?
Yeah, I was in my living room here in the, I guess it would be the Victoria Park section of Fort Lauderdale.
Okay.
We have moved to a much more modest abode.
You were watching the news?
Well, what happened was around 5 o'clock, various news outlets, I think Fox was first.
Breaking news, Roger Stone breathing a huge sigh of relief tonight because the White House has just announced the president will commute his sentence. He was set to go to prison on Tuesday, and now Roger Stone will not go to prison because President Trump has commuted his sentence.
There were reports that the president would commute my sentence. I still had no formal confirmation of that, but I do understand the news business, and nobody in network TV would get out there without multiple corroborations of something of that magnitude. So,
did you watch it on the news, or did somebody call you?
I watched them report it on the news. They didn't say it had happened. They said it will happen. And I was in the living room. Well, it's kind of, it's all on one floor, as it were. It's a pretty modest place, because once CNN showed my front door on national television, I had to leave that house because I was under a constant, stream of both well-wishers and not so well-wishers. At 7 o'clock, an unknown phone number popped up on my cell phone. I rarely answer those, but in this case I did. And there was a crisply efficient White House operator who said, the President of the United States is trying to reach Roger Stone. Is this Roger Stone? I said, yes, it is. He said, are you available for the President's call? I thought for a second, who says no to that, right? I said, yes, of course. He said, please hold. And I held for quite a while. And finally, the President came on the line, and he said, Roger, I've just signed a document. I want to read it to you. I have issued an act of clemency specific to your conviction. I have commuted your sentence, including prison time, probation, community service, and the fine. He says, I've done this for two reasons. One, I really believe that at your age and in your current condition, that sending you to a prison where there is coronavirus is extraordinarily dangerous. It's our policy not to send people like you to prison, but I gather that they're planning to do so. And that secondarily, anybody who will look at it objectively knows you did not get a fair trial. The fact that the jury forewoman was attacking you and me.
And those were the President's words?
Yes, on social media, that was a disaster. You should have gotten a new trial. Every lawyer I know thinks you should have gotten a fair trial. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I want to tell you that a lot of people told me not to do this because it's an election year. A lot of people. On the other hand, you have a lot of good friends. A lot of good people told me this was the right thing to do. And therefore, despite the politics of it, I've decided this is the right thing to do. So congratulations, you're a free man. He said, I'm not issuing a pardon, although I could, because I'd like you to fight this out. I think you got screwed. I think that you should take it to appeal. I think you might win on your appeal based on everything I've read, and I hope you will do that. But for the time being, this is my decision. So I said, thank you very much, Mr. President. How's the First Lady, who I've known since 1999? He said, she's great. By the way, she's a big supporter of my decision. She also thinks this is the right thing. He said, how is your beautiful wife? I said, she's great. He said, yeah, I saw her on TV talking about this. She makes a much better pitch than you.
That's funny. Anything else that was discussed in that phone call?
And that was it. He said, he finished by saying, "Congratulations, you're a free man," and he hung up.
Yeah. And in that moment, I was going to ask you how you felt in hearing the news by watching it on CNN or MSNBC or Fox. Your story is much better than what I was anticipating.
Well, I don't watch CNN for the same reason I don't eat out of the toilet. So I never watch it because nothing they report.
In full disclosure, I watch a lot of CNN.
Well, you're entitled, but just as long as you understand nothing they report is accurate or true.
When the president's call finished and you hung the phone up and you had learned, arguably in 2020, which is really hard to be one of the big stories in 2020 because there are so many, you became one of the big stories of 2020. Historically, is going to be remembered for a century. What was your reaction at that moment of how it washed over you?
I think it's important to understand that about 2 weeks before I was supposed to voluntarily surrender at this prison in Georgia, very far from where I live, which is extraordinary, we learned that the current Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Prisons directives that say that those convicted of nonviolent crimes who were either in incarceration or about to be incarcerated be moved to either home confinement or in some cases to time served. And that pertained, for example, to Michael Avenatti, the Democratic super lawyer who was convicted of stealing $25 million. He had been moved to home confinement. Michael Cohen, who had been moved to home confinement. Rick Gates, who testified against me in my trial falsely, he had been moved to home confinement. Even Paul Manafort had been moved to home confinement. We were kind of surprised to learn when the prosecutor in our case told us, "Oh, that regulation does not apply to your client." I'm 67 years old. I have a history of asthma. I've had respiratory problems my whole life. I almost died of it as an infant. I've had the same doctor in South Beach for 25 years. He was very concerned. So we filed an emergency motion. We did some research. First of all, we learned that the precedent in every judicial district in the country, including D.C., in the previous 30 days, every person in my situation who was about to go to prison had been moved to home confinement without
Again,
exception.
to this point, what was the motivation of why they were doing it uniquely?
Because I'm the most dangerous person in the world, because I got special treatment, as the Democrats keep saying. Here's another example of the special treatment that I got. The raid at my home, that was special treatment. Being prosecuted for lying to Congress when Clapper, Comer, Comey, Mueller, Brennan, or others lied to Congress but were not prosecuted. More special treatment. Now,
your observation then, just to put a fine point on is...
But let me finish it, because
sure.
it becomes even more egregious. So we filed an emergency motion with the trial judge, citing the legal precedent in every district in the country, including the D.C. district, citing the current regulations of DOJ and the Bureau of Prisons, citing under seal extensive medical records and a long dissertation by my doctor as to why, based on a number of studies, those with asthma are particularly susceptible to coronavirus, and an analysis of the prison they wanted to send me to, where the government was arguing that there were no COVID cases, but failed to note that there were 83 outstanding tests for which we still didn't have results. The judge ruled against me and ruled that I was to report. I then appealed that to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Surely, based on the law, the regulations, the facts, and the situation in the prison, I thought I would get relief. 20 minutes before the president commuted my sentence, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against me 3-0. Tell me there's no politics in the judiciary. The only person in America. So, their animus towards me?
Again, the principal point that I wanted to bring back to is your observation of why all of this has happened is because of your close association with the president and your unwavering support of the president. It's a way to get him.
That would certainly be number one. They wanted me to testify against him because they knew their Russia investigation had come up empty. That part of their report was a nothing burger. They wanted me at the last minute to be the ham in their ham sandwich, and I refused. They were very angry about that. They threatened a superseding indictment.
So that being the case, and you feeling that way, and everything that you have gone through in the last 4 years, certainly last 5 years in the election of the president, and what happened with WikiLeaks and Russia collusion, etc. You have this phone call. You've learned this of your sentence being commuted, and the risk of being in prison, as you've just described it, in Georgia could be a dangerous situation for you.
A death penalty, in my opinion.
Okay, and you are then called by the White House. You speak to the president. He tells you what he says. You hang up the phone. And what were your thoughts at that moment?
Let me address the last part of it, and then I'll tell you. I think this is much broader than Donald Trump. Meaning, yes, I was targeted because I was a friend of his, and perhaps they thought they could flip me and use me against him. But I also have been a bipartisan criticism of the American political establishment, the Bushes and the Clintons, Republicans and Democrats. I have stuck my thumb in their eye in 5 books, and I've spoken out and been very vocal. So I think I was being punished for questioning the status quo, from challenging a number of conventional thoughts put forward by the government. My sense right after the phone call was one of immediate relief, because when you take on the full power and the deep pockets of the government, and when the government is allowed to cheat at trial, there's substantial misconduct by the prosecutors in my case, which under the judge's pretrial rulings I'm not allowed to even discuss. I had a jury that was completely hostile. In other words, a jury that included not a single Republican, not a single independent, not a single military veteran, not a single Roman Catholic, not a single evangelical Christian, not a single gay person. There was nothing. The jury may have been ethnically diverse, but it was not ideologically diverse. It could have been the Clinton-Obama administration reunion. There were no sympathetic, or even in my opinion, unbiased jurors. But the judge held in jury selection, you could say, I hate Donald Trump's guts, I think he should be removed, but I can be objective in the trial of one of his closest friends. I just don't think that
in
works.
The overwhelming situation that you re-described there, you have come to the final conclusion moment until you fight this out in appeals and then whatever your next legal actions are. But in terms of the substantive consequence to yourself, you've come to the conclusion. You've hung up from the President of the United States. Your emotional response to this moment and all of the time that has gone into complete 5 decades of poking your finger in so many different eyes comes to a head at that moment. Your personal reaction was what?
I live to fight again.
To survive and stand up and start
fight
again.
I intend to write 5 more books. I'm going to write a book about this experience, but there are a number of things that I want to write about and speak about. I'll give you an example which you may think is somewhat off the wall, but I think it's important. There is lead in the drinking water in every major urban city in the country. It is poisoning the people who live in the inner cities. They're overwhelmingly minorities, mostly African Americans. The governments in these places have known about this for years, but nobody does anything about it.
Does this mean
I'm going to write a book about it.
Your pursuit of that, either in writing or advocacy, is going to be less in the direct political vein, and it's going to be more issue-oriented?
Well, I think that is a great political issue for some politician with the courage to pick it up and do something about it. The great urban machines have known for years this is a problem, but they just don't want to spend the money to fix it. The rich people in the suburbs, they're drinking pure drinking water. The people in the cities are being poisoned. I just started doing Google searches on it one day, and then I suddenly realized it's not just Flint, Michigan. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I think it's a great issue that nobody's paying attention to.
Yeah.
I'm going to write a book about it. I want to write a biography of Marcus Garvey, the early civil rights leader who I think was railroaded the same way they railroaded me. He was railroaded by the FBI in the 20s. Why? because he was preaching self-reliance and education and entrepreneurship. And he was getting a very big following in the African-American community, and that scared the shit out of the white power establishment of his day. I wouldn't even know who he was, but I was rummaging around in the Strand bookstore, and I found a very obscure biography somebody wrote of him, and it cost, 75 cents, and I bought it, and it was a great book. And then I studied him more and more. He was very flamboyant, by the way.
As
a great dresser.
I want to move on to other topics, but the conclusion of this process in 2020 and the political outline of everything that you've done here. I'm curious, when you hung up the phone, are you a person that could have, or were you a person that cried at that moment? Closure.
I did not cry. My wife and my daughter cried a little bit, but as I have said, I knew the moment would come. I just understood, based in my faith in God and also on political reality. I really believe that I've known Donald Trump for 40 years. I know he's a man of enormous courage. I know he has big balls. I know he will go against the conventional wisdom if he thinks it's right. And I always thought he would do the right thing. I had no promises. I had no assurances.
You never had a doubt.
I never had a doubt.
I want to move back to, you were talking about writing new books, and I want to talk about books, but there's one specifically that I want to transition into. I believe your most recent. It's called Stone's Rules.
Yes.
And it was fascinating to me because I've looked at quite a bit of it. And Stone's Rules are how to win in politics, business, and style. Now, the reason that caught my attention, and I think will catch LGBTQ community's attention, is you do something unique. Bob Dole didn't do this. Ronald Reagan didn't do this. Mitt Romney doesn't do this. You intersect politics, conservative politics, with business, which they do, but then you add style as a third word. And style seems to have been a very important issue throughout your entire life, which catches a lot of LGBTQ people that want to hate the conservative politics that you represent, but it kind of pauses them a moment of going, our community is very style oriented. And so you've stepped across a line that gets our attention. How do you intersect those three things?
Well, the only reason Stone's Rules is not a political book in the sense that I don't care if you're a progressive or a liberal or a socialist or a vegetarian or a libertarian or non-political. I think the book can benefit you because the book's about life's lessons, things I have learned in life. The anecdotes I use reference conservative or Republican historical examples only because those are the examples that I've lived, but it would be no different if it were written by someone who had been through the Kennedy campaigns and had campaigned for Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Politics is politics, so I like to believe that my advice is, generally speaking, generic.
Yes, but there's a divergence. I think very few people would argue that Richard Nixon was a style guru, that he was committed to style, and you might get ready to correct me, but largely most of the icons in the conservative movement in the last 30 or 40 years have not been associated with style. There was a phrase that was called that somebody identified you as the Lord of Mischief. Did you ever say that?
No, that was written by a guy named Matt Labash in a profile in the I forget the Standard magazine.
The Standard, yes. And the reference to that and the style is that Roger Stone is interesting and unique because he is interesting in commitment beyond this hardcore granite kind of reflection of what conservatives are and whatever new conservatives are. You kind of poke your finger in the eye of, you're not going to be boring.
Well, that's true. Let's go back to Nixon. Nixon certainly would be considered by no one to be a fashion icon. He was an introvert in an extrovert's business. He was the antithesis of Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was graceful. Jack Kennedy was gracious. Jack Kennedy was cultured. Jack Kennedy was the first man to wear a two-button suit. Had them made for him by a London tailor when his father was the ambassador to the United Kingdom. But the standard American man's two-button suit was pioneered by JFK. He also always looked like he had never thought about what he put on. He just dressed casually, and he always looked like $1 million. Notice how he almost always wears a solid color tie, a solid color shirt, and a white shirt. A solid color tie, solid color suit, and a white shirt. He always has a very small, very elegant knot. He was a great dresser, kind of the American Ivy League style. Nixon didn't even know how to knot a tie. The knot of his tie was almost always wrong. However, he is the first person who understands the role of television in American politics. He is the first person who uses Madison Avenue advertising techniques and branding. This is branding. He wasn't doing this in 1960.
That's how I started the interview. Your marketing branding.
He wasn't doing this in 1960. He wasn't doing this until 1968.
Yeah.
And it becomes a trademark gesture. So he understood the importance of television in politics, and therefore he's a style leader in that sense. The imagery created by television. And every campaign for president since that time, both organizationally, structurally, and strategically, is based on a model that he designed in 1968. Nothing's really changed.
I laugh LGBT America because today is the first time I've met Roger Stone. We're neighbors in this community. I'm in Wilton Manors and he's in Fort Lauderdale. But I laugh in terms of what I've written or what I've read about you in terms of fashion, because coming today, Roger kept me waiting for about an hour, and a lot of it had to do with clothes and hair, and it's a complete embracement of the image and the branding and the fashion that you represent. Does it wash over you that that's unique in the conservative? Maybe Republican, but let's use a broad term, conservative. In the conservative world in America, that's unusual, of the embracement of fashion?
Well, it's a difficult,
and style.
It's a difficult question. So there was a guy named Mr. Blackwell, and Mr. Blackwell was
I'm of an age, who knows?
He was a Hollywood columnist. He was originally a couturier, but he became a columnist. Mm-hmm. And he would become famous because once a year he would release his best and worst dressed list in all strata. So movie stars, actors, radio personalities, TV personalities, athletes, business moguls, models, across the board. And his opinion of your dressing could destroy you or it could elevate you. Mm-hmm. And he was very waspy and very vicious to those he thought were poorly dressed. Anyway, when he died, I said, this is a great tradition. Why should it die with Mr. Blackwell? No reason for it to die with him. So for 13 years, every New Year's Day, I have produced a best and dressed worst list for the country. Oh. With one hiatus. This past year, I was gagged from publishing anything on the internet, so I couldn't write my yearly column, which was annoying because I had done a lot of research and so on. The point of this is, it gets harder and harder to write every year. It's not the people who are poorly dressed that are hard to find. They're easy to find. It's the people who are exceptionally well dressed that are hard to find. It's almost as if nobody gives any thought to what they're wearing when they leave the house. So finding men and women who are exceptional in their taste and who understand the difference between style and fashion, because style is a standard, it's always the same, whereas fashion is fleeting. Hemlines go up, hemlines go down, ties become wider, ties become thinner, lapels become wider, lapels become thinner. That's all fashion. Fashion's temporary, fashion's fleeting, whereas style is a constant. I have really enjoyed this list, and I try to make it age appropriate. In other words, there are young, rising people on it. There are people you never heard of on it who are just particularly well dressed, although most of the names you would know. But it's been fun to do, and I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah, America will show you some of Roger Stone's style list. I was not aware of that. But to my question, would you be surprised that LGBTQ America would have a reaction that your commitment to style, which is, you've had this commitment through your entire life, is unusual in conservative or Republican circles?
No, I would go a little further. I think it's unusual in politics. Almost nobody of any party cares about what...
Well, there's a lot of LGBT people serving in politics now.
No, except for them, perhaps. Except for him. But I mean, Jack Kennedy is the last...
Yeah, but that's 5 decades ago.
Well, that's not completely true.